Did you know women are more likely than men to develop dry eyes, which may be due to hormonal changes during the menstrual cycle or after menopause, and the use of oral contraceptives? Give your dry, burning, or irritated eyes a daily refresh with Refresh Optive Mega 3 Lubricant Eye Drops, a preservative-free formula that provides fast-acting, lasting relief. Refresh Optive Mega 3 is safe to use as often as needed. Find Refresh online or in the eye drop aisle at all major retailers.
If you want to feel more connected to humanity and a little less alone, listen to Beautiful Anonymous. Each week, I take a phone call from one random anonymous human being. There's over 400 episodes in our back catalog. You get to feel connected to all these different people all over the world. Recent episodes include one where a lady survived a murder attempt by her own son. But then the week before that, we just talked about Star Trek. It can be anything. It's unpredictable. It's raw. It's real. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
There's evidence that human beings have been brewing beer or beer-like beverages at least for over 11,000 years, with indications of barley being used over 5,000 years ago. I think it's probably safe to say that the delicious Pilsner, IPA, and oatmeal stout that we're all familiar with today is a far cry from what the original brewers were making way back when, and there's a good chance that they never really imagined beer would become what it is today. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Steve Thanos to share our thoughts and opinions on the direction we think brewing and beer is headed.
It just seems like this is a topic that will kind of never go away. And I'm more than happy to discuss what we have to say about all of this.
Yeah. So typically the topics that we focus on for these Brews Views episodes are a bit more concrete in nature, I guess, which makes it easy for us to share our opinions on whatever it is we're talking about. However, the fact the topic for this episode is sort of future based makes it, I don't know, a little bit more amoebic, as it were. While we'll certainly be sharing opinions on what got us to where we're at now, or what we think got us to where we're at now, the best we can do is presume where we're going to be in the future, and those presumptions will be influenced by the opinions that we hold now. So now, as I point out every time, this is a Brews Views episode where we allow ourselves to speak a little bit more candidly than usual, meaning we might use language that some people don't like or share ideas that you may disagree with. That's sort of the point of this series, so it's certainly not our intention to piss anybody off, but rather have an honest, unfiltered conversation about a topic that some might view as a bit controversial, but we view as sort of fun to talk about, all in the name of learning and having a little bit of fun. So, well, if you enjoy this show and you want to help us to continue producing it, we would love for you to become a patron of Brewlosophy, which you can do over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up later this month, May of 2025, longtime member of the brewing community and an innovator in his own right, the dude credited with introducing Brut IPA to the masses, Kim Sturdivant, will be hanging out with patrons. If this name is unfamiliar to you, it's likely you are relatively new to brewing, because Brut IPA was all the rage, I believe, back in like 2017 through about 2019 or 2020, to the point that most well-known craft breweries were making their own versions, including the likes of Sierra Nevada, Founders Brewing, and so many more. I'm really excited for this one and trust it's going to be quite unique. To be part of this session, all you have to do is make a pledge of $3 or more by Friday, May 30th, 2025, as Kim's going to be taking questions on Saturday, the 31st. All past sessions are stored on our private Patreon and YouTube pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. And just a heads up, a reminder, we have since moved away from Facebook and are doing these sessions on Teams now. So those who participate are able to actually talk to, ask questions of, hop on and like I said, create a conversation with the guest, which has been really, really cool. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. Finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, as it helps those who may not be familiar with us yet to more easily find the show. Plus, we really do like knowing what you think about how we're doing. A huge thanks to everybody who has already taken the time to do this. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are legit, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You are not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run a killer YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and other equipment, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brewlosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. All right, listener and the Brew Club member Daniel Lott wrote in with a suggestion for the show, and I'm curious what others think. Daniel said, I started reading your articles and listening to the podcasts in 2016 because of the science/experimentation aspect. I am a nerd for it, and I love it. Not just the science, though. It's the educational value that kept me coming back. I recently started entering competitions, though I've never been to one in person, and I'm always curious as to what the judges are thinking and if they're conversing at all, how they are organized their thoughts and notes. What if there was a series on the rotating lineup for the Brewlosophy podcast where you and other judges actually judge listener submitted beers? Maybe no scoring involved, but at least comparing the submission to the style standard. I know judging is subjective, but hearing active judging of multiple iterations of beer might be educational and enlightening. I know this is the opposite of the 1 minute beer review, which I loved and so very much miss, but maybe there's something there, especially with us in the Brew Club picking up steam on the competition circuit. So here's the deal, Steve. I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, but I'd be lying if I said that this idea hasn't crossed my mind over the years. It's actually been tossed around among contributors over the years as well. And while I think it could be a lot of fun, the biggest thing that's held me back, I'll be honest about this, is the fact that our friends over at the Brewing Network already have a show where they more or less do just that. Dr. Homebrew, which is hosted by the great Jason J.P. Petros, continues to drop, I believe, 2 episodes per month or so where they evaluate styles of beer based on the BJCP guidelines. I could be wrong. It's possible that they've changed the way they do things over the years, but either way, I'm not sure they'd care if we, integrated a series where we judged beers and of course we'd put our own unique spin on it. I just wasn't really convinced or didn't really know if our listeners would be interested in a series like that. Honestly, with the new studio, I would love to do more stuff with live co-hosts, and I've got a bunch of friends locally who all have their BJCP their BJCP judges, so I don't think it'd be difficult to organize something like that. I don't know, though. If this is something enough people want us to do, I'm totally down to try it. Steve, what are your thoughts on us doing a show that's more focused on, I guess, it sounds like what Daniel's asking for is rather than a bunch of dorks, Jersey, I'm sorry, not even Jersey, holy cow, Tim, Justin, and Craig and myself sitting around and drinking beers that the Brew Club brewed and just kind of talking shit about them. They more of an organized, like, actual judging session. You think that'd be something our listeners would enjoy?
Well, before I answer that, let's just get something straight. I think the dorks would still be involved. So that doesn't really change. But yeah, I think it's a great idea, actually. And it's something that I think our listeners would just kind of eat up, because it gives you a kind of an insight into what people are thinking. I know I've judged in the past, and we kind of, to answer Daniel's question in the very beginning about like what, there's not a whole lot of talking and stuff like that. There isn't when we are actually like tasting the beer and writing down our notes, and you've done this before. But then we all do converse later on and kind of like share our thoughts and stuff like that. So I think it would lend itself really well to what we already do. It's just a kind of a more structured way of looking at it, I think.
I think to me it sounds like you can't do a podcast without some intention of wanting to be entertaining. So, sure. Like you said, Steve, the times that I haven't judged in a long time. I've been too busy actually doing Brewlosophy stuff to make time to travel to competitions and actually judge them, unfortunately. But I still have that desire. I think it's fun. You're like you said, though, there's times when you're judging where it's just dead air for a long time, and that's not very entertaining. So I wonder if what Daniel's asking about is more of like, do the more organized official type of judging, but be more vocal, talk about your thoughts. It would be very difficult. And by difficult, I mean, I think it could be very boring to actually watch a couple people judge, because like you said, the chit chat usually happens a little bit afterwards. There might be a little bit of question and answer between the two judging partners during the actual flight, while they're drinking the flight. But hey, if this is something our listeners want us to do, I could easily organize it. I could probably get some local, professional brewers, as well as another, BJCP judge or two, to come on and do that kind of thing. I just would want to know that it's not going to be a dud that people think is boring. So hit us up, let us know. I think it'd be a lot of fun. You can email feedback@brewlosophy.com to leave us a note on that and encourage us to do it, I suppose. Or you can leave us a comment on the social media post of this episode. We read all of that stuff as well. So thank you for the idea, Daniel. All right, when we're back from this break, our views on where brewing and beer is headed.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brewlosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. I got into craft beer the week I turned 21. This was all the way back in 2002. I lived in Bellingham, Washington at the time, and there was just one craft brewery. It was Boundary Bay Brewing in the city at the time. It was less than a year later that I started homebrewing, and other than the dude who introduced me to the idea that beer could be brewed in my own kitchen, I was sort of the lone wolf. When I moved to California for grad school in 2004, right after getting married, I put brewing on the back burner, but still enjoyed visiting craft breweries, of which I believe there were 2 or 3 in this area at that time that I moved here. The only one that I would actually recommend to friends, in less than a decade from that point, craft beer was experiencing the crazy boom that a bunch of us people who've been around a while often talk about. And if you weren't a home brewer yourself, chances are you knew one or a handful. It was a really awesome time to be a home brewer, and along with the rising popularity of beer came a ton of new ideas. Brewers experimenting with different techniques and ingredients to achieve their very unique desired goals. We were on this upward trajectory that to me felt like it was just never going to end. And then, well, something changed. Now, we've talked about the lull in brewing and beer that it's experienced over the last few years. Who knows if it was because of COVID or something else? That will not be our point today necessarily. Rather, with the belief that it'll never completely die, we did think that it would be a fun idea to kind of project our thoughts and opinions into the future a bit and share our opinions on where we see this industry headed, considering where it's come from and where it is today. And when I'm going to use that term industry loosely in this episode to include not just craft beer, but also brewing, home brewing, anything that involves, craft beer in this day and age, which I would contend home brewing does. Steve, before we start opining too much, I've shared a little bit about my background already, and in past episodes, I've kind of belabored it, I think, but why don't you share us a little bit about your brewing and beer path?
So I kind of got into beer kind of later in my 20s, like mid 20s actually. I didn't really venture out into drinking much, at an earlier age. because of like health stuff and medications that I was on, and I was deathly afraid of mixing the two. So I definitely had like a more, I don't know, more responsible approach to it. And I can remember back when like friends would be, all gung ho about, dollar pitchers or dollar Miller Lite cans or whatever at a local bar. I would be, looking for stuff like, I don't know, Sierra Nevada, a pale ale, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Dogfish Head, Sam Adams was there. I think a little bit later on, Red Hook I was a really big fan of Red Hook, mostly because I liked their bottles, and I was bottling as a home brewer in the beginning, like many of us do, and I just loved their short little stouts bottles, and that was kind of my introduction to craft beer. And then I got into home brewing, and then I started going to breweries more and more, and I'm now, addicted to it and can't get away from it. And I think there was all of a sudden, the one thing that jumped out at me in the beginning when I went to my very first homebrew club meeting and then like sat in a brewery to drink was the sense of community and the sense of people coming together for one common thing. And that always kind of intrigued me, and it still does today. 10, 15 years later, it's still something that I'm drawn to and something that I don't want to give up. So it's good in my book.
Yeah, I feel like there's certain tropes among at least within Brewlosophy, but I think it's kind of among a lot of people who do what we do in homebrewing, and by that I just mean create content, podcast, websites, and all that, to really focus on this community thing. And we just to keep things organized for this episode, what I'd like to do is kind of start by talking about our perspectives on where we think homebrewing is headed, and then in the next segment, I mean, there's going to be a mishmash. We're going to be blending stuff in, I'm sure, but in the next segment, we'll focus more on craft beer in general. But I'll tell you, I'm with you. Because of Brewlosophy, and I think this is a good thing. I am so involved in homebrewing largely because of what I do for this thing, for Brewlosophy. There have been times like I just moved. I still haven't brewed yet. I was just telling you before we got on to record that my brewing garage, what is going to become my brewing garage, is still just jam packed full of shit that that I need to get rid of. I need to take to the dump. We've got traveling coming up, so it's just unfeasible for me. I still have to run electric. I have to do all of these things, but I'm still a homebrewer. I still go out. I still communicate with homebrewers. I'm getting text from folks who are hanging out at the SoCal Homebrewers Fest this weekend. That is what I love about it. The community is really, to me, it's weird because it really is what makes homebrewing stick, like you said. Yep. We could have these things in our lives that make us go, oh, maybe I should hold off on that. No, I hear from people whose doctors are like, you need to ease up on the drinking, whatever, and they still stay in homebrewing despite cutting their drinking either out or complete or down by a lot because of the community. And I wonder, thinking about where homebrewing was when I started. Like I said, I got into homebrewing because a dude that I worked with at the time came in late and told me that he was bottling his homebrew, and it blew my mind that you could do that in your house. I had no idea at 21 years old that was a possibility. I started brewing. It was me and my roommate, and even just the two of us brewing together felt so good. When I got really deeply into it about 6, 7 years later after graduating grad school, and I built up my system, and I was brewing with my buddy Chris, who, rest in peace, sadly is no longer with us. That was when I connected with the real community. And my word, it's why Brewlosophy exists today, is because I loved the chat, between people. And, that was this was in 2014 when there was a good mix of like in-person and online stuff. One of the trends that I've noticed is it seems like the online, I mean, who would have guessed, right? That the online stuff is way bigger now than and I think COVID is partly responsible for that. It forced people to commune online. But it's not a bad thing. I'm no Luddite. I think it's actually kind of cool. And the ability for people to meet up on Discord or, on Facebook. We've got the Brew Club, and these dudes are doing stuff all the time together, talking about each other in the same way that I might talk about my local buddies. I just think it's really cool.
Well, I mean, look at in the sense of how we met. I met you in Minneapolis, and we've been chatting a little bit, online, and your one kind of smart ass comment about my Brewlosophy shirt, and like all of a sudden it's like, you're my friend. And we would hang out, and then throughout the conference, and then I saw you the next year in Portland, and it just stuck. So yeah, those online friendships, just they're not to be I don't know, like ignored, I guess, is the right word, because it does seem like, it's a different way of going about it, but, it's kind of redefining, how we do things, and the internet's here to stay, and that's just the way it is. So I embraced it.
Well, and here's the funny thing. Anybody who's a decade younger than you or me is like, why are they talking like this is some weird thing? You have to remember that, we're in our fourth decade of existence here. We are, I like, there's the whole argument between like Generation X and millennials. I was born in early 81, my wife in late 80. Neither of us identify with either of those generations. And I read this, I think it was a sociologist wrote this paper on those who were born between about 78 and like 84 should be their own little generation called Zennials, because, we were the no internet for the better part of our childhood, and then internet during those formative, adolescent years. So we helped our parents to understand it, and our kids are still helping us to understand it. Right. So there's this weird, and so for us, that whole like online community thing, at least for a lot of the people in my age range that I've talked to, it really is kind of like there's this hesitance, I guess, initially to feel like that's as quality as an in-person relationship. But I talk to my kids about it, and they're like, Dad, that's normal. They're like, well, I don't even know why you would care about that.
I think, I think when we were younger, we associated with like, how much did we get just thrown at us about the whole like stranger danger type thing, in schools and stuff like that. And I think that there was like this link between that and online people and online predators and whatnot. And believe me, they're there. I'm not that naive to think that they're not. They do exist. But I think that there are some people out there that are good, and that they do mean well, and you can develop and foster these relationships with people. And that's what has, begun with the beer community, I think. So, it does take a little bit of work and a little bit of, trusting people and whatnot.
Which can be hard in this day and age, Steve.
Sure, for sure. Without a doubt. But, if you're careful, like what we preach to our kids, and it's all good, I think.
Yeah. We're gonna move on to something else besides the community, but I really do feel like even back in the day, the community was a big part of the reason a lot of people who got into homebrewing back then are still homebrewing today. And I really do feel, I think about what homebrewing has become. 20 years ago, there were people making content, but it was really just like homegrown. They weren't necessarily businesses. We've been able to create an industry out of creating content specifically about homebrewing. Thank you to the internet for that. I understand that. There is, I have this thing, and people judge me for it, and I guess I've earned that, but I'm kind of, I get a little bit disgusted with what I refer to as celebrityism and people viewing somebody who happens to be well known because of this art that they engage in. And don't get me wrong, there are celebrities who eat it up. We all know that.
Sure.
But even in our industry, I remember thinking, oh no, I don't want people to think that just because we have a voice and I enjoy recording it and I'm comfortable enough being a blowhard on a podcast that I'm not approachable and that we're not going to be cool. If you've ever been to, I mean, Steve's a perfect example, right? If you've ever been to a homebrew con or you've been to a conference that I'm at and you come hang out, you're not going to be asked to stop hanging out with us.
Oh, no.
Because the community is what matters.
Yep.
And my hope is that with the rise of these silly, I hate the term influencer. My kids make fun of Brewlosophy for being influencers because they know how much I hate that term. And I asked my daughter, my 15-year-old, I said, what is it that like pushes somebody from being a normal, whatever, to being a quote influencer? And she said, Dad, when you have over 30,000 followers on Instagram, you're an influencer. I was like, oh God. And I get it. I get that that's the language they use. And my hope would be that as that continues to rise, that the popularity in content creators who are just putting out 15-second clips to get a viral video or whatever, that we keep our humility about us in homebrewing, that we're still approachable, and that the community recognizes that we are, the people who are out here willing to set aside way too much time to create content for this thing that we love, that doesn't separate us from anybody. And I've talked to people who feel like there is a little bit of a separation there. Well, what I'm going to preach before, from this pulpit here is that there isn't with us. And I really hope people understand that. We try to honor everybody who reaches out to us. We try to respond to every email. And that's just the way we want to be. So my hope for the future, again, my opinion is that I think we're going to start seeing some content creators, perhaps from the younger generation who are becoming of age, trying to capitalize on that viral video moment and trying to and more power to them if they're able to make it. But I kind of hope we don't go that direction.
Right. And I actually have a little story about kind of the popularity thing. It just happened actually last month, and then kind of reemerged a couple nights ago at a homebrew club meeting. I didn't attend the March meeting for Pale, and it was at a brewery that we usually don't go to, but this guy Tim, who is a beer tender at Solemn Oath Brewing Company in Naperville, was talking to our president Frank, and he was all geeked out about, he was like, wait, you're with Pale? And he's like, I think I sent this to the group chat as well, Marshall, but the guy's like, isn't that Steve Thanos' homebrew club from Brewlosophy? And Frank is texting me all this later on, and I'm like, I didn't know that. I don't even know who this is, but tell him I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be able to make it tonight. So, I'm like, I did not know that I was that popular. And he goes, well, apparently you are. So fast forward to 3 nights ago, I walk into Workforce for our regular scheduled meeting. And the beer tender there, it was like, oh, Tim from Solemn Oath really missed you. He was really bummed that you weren't able to make it to the last meeting. I'm like, yeah, the whole popularity thing, I really have to start questioning that. Jokingly said that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get out there. I'm going to see Tim. So Tim, if you're listening, I know you do listen. And thank you for your support. I will be at Solemn Oath sometime soon. My school year is coming to an end, and I can actually, be less of a hermit and get out and socialize more. Just give me some time, brother, and we'll connect. But yeah, it's that sense of community and that sense of being humble enough to recognize that we don't really take ourselves all that seriously. We just make beer, we talk about it, we write about it. That's it. I mean, we're just crazy guys who like to do this. That's all. It's nothing special.
Yeah. It's funny. I've had similar experiences where I go out and somebody, I talk a lot on this podcast, and somebody will recognize my voice. Obviously, it's not some random person in the it's usually a home brewer or somebody in craft beer who likes the show. And yeah, I've heard your voice sounds so familiar.
Yeah.
You talk about beer, right? Dude, I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty humorous or entertaining when that kind of thing happens, especially when my wife is there and
Yes.
she's looking at me like, "Are you kidding me?" Similar story. This was a few years ago, but we were down in El Segundo at my wife's uncle's place. We like to go down and party with them every once in a while. And he's like, "Man, I'm gonna take you to this brewery. It's really cool. They've got a really cool setup." And so we go over there, and every once in a while I'll remember to I want to give love to these cool breweries that I go to. I throw a picture on Instagram, and within 15 minutes, this really cool guy shows up, and he's like, "I saw your post. Figured I'd come say hi." My uncle works my wife's uncle works in Hollywood, so he was like, "What the hell was that, dude?" And but to me, what it is it's as much as we could pat ourselves on the back for that kind of a thing, it really is to me just a sign of how cool the community is. They want to hang out, they want to talk about beer,
for sure,
and I will always welcome that. I love it. So okay, we have focused on community this entire time so far, but there are some other reasons that I view people, my experience from getting into home brewing in the past and into home brewing in the past, and then what might bring people in the future. So historically, used to hear people say, "Oh, I'm into homebrewing because I don't have access to these styles of beers that I tried when I was in fill in the blank country, or when I was across the country at this really unique brewery for the time, and I want to be able to drink that kind of beer, so I'm going to make my own." And that was such a popular reason. I remember for me up in Bellingham, it was English beers, like the few homebrewers that I would talk to while I was buying my stuff at the homebrew store were making Irish red ale, and they were making bitter, and they were back then we would always call it ESB because in the Northwest we had Red Hook, and I want to make my own version of that. I want to see what it's like to brew a version of my own. Or it would be experimentation, right? I want to add such and such to this beer to see what it would taste like. And back then it wasn't all the crazy stuff we're using nowadays. It'd be like, "Oh, I want to make this English beer but with Cascade hops. I want to see what that might taste like." So there was this drive to for lack of a better term, experiment. But really, I think it was making things that you don't have access to. And I don't know about you, Steve. It sounds like you kind of got into the craft beer thing maybe a little bit later in age than I did.
A little bit,
but
yeah.
In the Pacific Northwest, we always had decent access to good beer, I feel like. And there was a lot that came out of the Pacific Northwest beer-wise. But still, you'd go to the beer store and everything cold was Bud Miller, Coors, Pabst, Rainier, all that stuff, which that's fine. But if you wanted something good, it really was, it was a bit more difficult to find. We had one store in Bellingham that I remember going to that had Polliner, Weiss beer. And you could get that. And it was like, wow, they brought it in, they must have a great beer buyer. Mm-hmm. And again, we're talking 2002, 2003. If you wanted a good Hefeweizen, what we called it back then, you had to make it yourself or find a place that put it on tap. And even back then, with the paucity of people who are really into craft beer, chances are, if you're getting a some sort of a regionally international type of beer, it's pretty old. It's not a great example of it. I've actually heard some people say that that's where this idea that Belgian ale is supposed to taste like bubble gum basically. Came from, is because as it aged, those notes kind of were accentuated. But I look to the future. Is that going to be a reason people get into homebrewing? And I feel like if we were to market homebrewing to people for try a beer that you don't have, they're going to look and say, I have access to pretty much anything I want these days, more or less. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's the drawback about homebrewing, and we have access to such awesome beers now, and brewers who are experimenting with things and trying new ingredients. And is there really a need to make it your own? Now, part of me feels like, hell yeah, there is, so you do it and it's awesome. But that's ingrained in me. That's the DIY aspect in my brain that loves the creation and the creativity of it. I don't think everyone has that. I think there's a fair amount of people who do. So, if you're creative and if you're into it, then come on, let's homebrew. It's fun. But yeah, I can kind of see what you're saying. We do still have access to a lot of beer, although I do tend to question a lot of breweries are still not really doing a lot of English ales or Belgian ales, so there's still that aspect to it. I think that can trigger a person to saying, like us years ago, hey, I want to make that myself because I can't find it somewhere.
What's funny about that, Steve, is that, back in the day, it was because people, there just weren't that many breweries, like commercial breweries. And so they would make 4 or 5 flagship beers. We're going to talk more about that, in the next segment, but they would make their 4 or 5, and that's what would drive people to go drink those is, I got to try Fat Tire. I remember Fat Tire being all the rage, or Mac and Jack's up in the Northwest, African Amber. And you're like, you got to get this. And then that would be what anybody wanted to drink. And so lack of access was because there was truly limited amounts being brewed. What's interesting now is that we went through a phase, in my opinion. I remember going to House of Pendragon or going all the way out to Russian River or Lagunitas, and they would have this amazing spread. And it wasn't always the same thing every time you showed up. There was a good portion of taps that would be like, we made an ordinary bitter and we made an imperial stout. And you're like, this is really cool. I feel like now, because of where popularity has kind of, there's become this bottleneck of what people want, right? So rather than having 15 taps with 15 different styles of beer, what I'm noticing is you go to a brewery and they have 15 taps with 4 styles of beer, 3 of them being different versions of IPA. You know what I mean? And then there's a seltzer and you're like, whoa, I don't hate IPA. I don't even hate hazy IPA as much as people like to email me about that. I'm not a huge fan of it compared to crisp, clear IPA, but I'll drink a good hazy. Sure. Everywhere I go has like 4 versions of hazy IPA. I do like to see that they were coming back to like the West Coast IPAs kind of making a comeback a little bit, but there's just so much IPA out there that those taps no longer have room for the stuff that I feel a lot of people get into homebrewing for, which is, the English beers, the Belgian ales, the stuff like that, which I just think that's such an interesting thing to observe.
It is interesting, and I always have to remind myself, instead of being critical about it, just remind yourself that it's because it sells and these breweries want to make money. And if you want to be able to experience and drink those beers, then that's the way it's going to have to be, unfortunately. To fortunate, I don't know, how, depending on how you look at it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, again, my views are maybe a little different because I feel confident enough to be able to brew something that I can't find elsewhere. Yeah. And that's a sense of, I can do this and let's do it. So, okay. I don't have to depend on, what's at the brewery or, it's the same thing if you're looking at like baked goods or whatever, Starbucks doesn't have their blueberry scones anymore. Damn it, I'm going to make my own. So, it's all relative, right? It's just the way it goes. So, and I'm fine with that.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not hating on the fact that breweries have 15 taps with 4 different styles. In fact, it's saved me quite a bit of money because now if I go out, it used to be, and I've heard from others who were the same way. You'd go to this brewery that has all these different styles, and you're like, okay, I know that they're a good brewery. They get a lot of good, they've got a good reputation. Mm-hmm. I have to try as many of these as my body will allow me to try. I mean, it was that FOMO thing. I do not want to go home and there's a great brewery up in Sacramento called Alaro Brewing. And I'm telling you, the fact these guys aren't more known, I think is purely because they still make classic styles of beer and they do it so goddamn good, Steve. I'm telling you, it's phenomenal. And there are those little gems, I think, in most states, where it's like, oh, you got to go check this place out. They're not really well known. But another reason, besides the fact that it's saving me a little coin, is it does make homebrewing more enticing. Okay, I love hazy IPA, but I only want to pay for so many when I'm at the craft brewery, and I still want some variety. Well, go make your own. And I think that's really cool. And that really does speak to, again, I felt like this was more talked about, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, the whole DIY thing, or what I remember an article getting written, I think we were referenced in it, about the maker community, right? People wanting to just make for the sake of making, and homebrewing got looped into that. It's the same with sourdough, sourdough bread. It's like, I could go to the store and buy, even if it was every option of beer there are some of us, and this is where I would say I kind of fall into now, is that I love pouring that pint of beer and knowing that this wouldn't exist if it weren't for my effort. And same thing with bread. I could go to the store and buy a loaf of sourdough, but when I go through the process of making that loaf and watch my family eating it, as cheesy as that might sound, it feels better to me than knowing I spent $4 on a sourdough loaf. You know what I mean?
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, I that's why I, for the last 20 years, have for 2 days slaved in the kitchen making Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, yeah, that's same it. Deal. That is in me. That is ingrained into my soul, and it will never go away. And having friends come over and saying, "What do you have on tap? What are we drinking?" Like, okay, let's do this. And I get geeked. It's really cool. Or, being at a homebrew club and meeting and maybe saying, seeing people that maybe you've seen for last 10 years and they're still interested in what are you brewing these days, or you meet somebody new is in the club now and they're interested, and they have that same passion that we have. It's just fun. It's infectious. And,
I love it.
You get geeked up about that just by experiencing what other people are experiencing with your beer. Yeah. So I'm all for it.
Yeah. I do think also we've been, I did not think we would spend as much time talking about this stuff as we are, but go figure. Right. It's a Brews Use. That tends to happen.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it does.
I will say that I think in the future, there's this is my observation. Again, this is my opinion. I'm not speaking truths here necessarily, but I do feel like with most hobbies, and I know people who are into photography, who are into, fixing old cars, and they've kind of talked about a very similar phenomenon wherein it starts off this very, very small niche thing that people are doing, and those very few people, relatively few people, come together, and it's like their thing that they're holding on to. And as it gets popular, that feeling that they had when they were, when it was still small is kind of like, hey, what's going on? Well, it grows and it grows and it grows almost, too fast. And then people start viewing it as like, oh, those nerds, they like, it's kind of and I say that lovingly, of course,
sure,
we are those nerds.
Oh yeah.
But it, it becomes this thing that people look at and they're like, okay, weird. And they kind of avoid that. And I wonder if in the future that I feel like that perspective is already starting to kind of get sanded down a little bit. And if people will start to see, as they have with other hobbies, like I would say, sourdough bread making has been a thing. I was making a loaf for my aunt, and she told me, that like people were doing this way back in the 60s. There was like this popular thing, I think it was the 60s, she said, where it became, again, like it wasn't popular for a while, and then the whole big group of people got into it, and then that kind of faded away, that whole ebbing and flowing. I could see, though, given generational differences, which again, I am no expert on generations older or younger than mine. I'm barely an expert on my own damn generation, but
right.
But for me, just understanding, seeing what my kids, just observing them and seeing the way that they interact with the world, I could see people being enticed to start making their own beer purely for the aspect of, say, brewing to extremes. I want to see what I can get away with hopping rates, or with these new, products that the people are putting out there. I want to see what happens if I try to make a 20%, IPA, ABV IPA type of deal. It's not just going to be the community piece, because the community is so easily accessible now that we have the online stuff. Right. I could see people getting into brewing purely because they have that competitive nature about them and they want to compete or just to express themselves artistically. I'm surprised that we're not to a point yet where brewing isn't viewed as an art. And we've talked about art versus science and all of
Plenty
that.
of times.
But I could see people getting into it just as an expression of their artistic, urges, which I think would be interesting. So,
and even like different and to communicate it through different mediums, like, online, different social media, platforms, TikTok, Instagram, maybe not so much Facebook anymore, but those types of platforms that are all really allowing people to be expressive and be artistic, and to kind of get those views, I guess, is what you ultimately want, right? It's kind of lost on me, but whatever. I do tend to agree with your daughter, though, in terms of we are kind of like influencers. There is a parallel, even though we don't like it, and it's kind of cringy, and just the mere fact that I used the word cringy is cringy, right?
That's so true, dude. Yeah. Oh man.
But that's my vibe, man. That's another
Oh boy,
expression.
the vibe. Yeah.
Yeah. So, whatever. It's all good. It's interesting to see the evolution, and I think that's where we could be going. In the future. So
yeah, you know what I think is funny, Steve, and we'd be stupid not to actually talk about demographics and stuff like that. You got a hobby that is made up of largely people who look just like you and me. Some element of facial hair, middle-aged men who have careers and who do this thing, whatever. We collect data on this every year, and it is consistent. And what, I don't want to belabor this point, but what are we going to do to bring people in who don't look like us when the people who have a voice in this industry are the people who look like us? Like, how do we fix that? How do we remedy that? And what I've been seeing, I follow as much homebrewing content creators as I can, as I'm introduced to, through the algorithm at least. And man, I'm seeing this increase. I'm seeing that what seems to be this trend, and maybe it's because the algorithm is targeting me with this, of people who don't look like us. And I really hope that is what I want to see, that more than probably anything else in this industry, is the opening up of, I guess the welcoming of people who are different and who love this hobby just as much as we do, because that's what ultimately matters. Okay, real quick. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, when I started brewing, when I started brewing, it was extract and partial grain, a partial mash, a little bit of grains, and you'd steep it and you'd blend in some extract, chill it down, and you'd ferment it. It was very easy. At least based on the surveys that I've seen, one of those surveys is our very own General Homebrewer survey. People are jumping right into homebrewing now with all grain. I mean, that is a thing. And I love that. I hated when people would say, oh, you got to get your feet wet by using extract first. No, you don't. I don't know why anybody would say that. If you want to, by all means, do it. No judgment. But good Lord, brewing all grain is just as easy as brewing with extract, particularly given the equipment that we have available to us today. You could go to morebeer.com and buy a Robo Brew system or a Brewzilla for a very, very decent price, and start making all grain batches of beer that rival some of the best craft beer that you're going to get locally. I'm dead serious. I've had people's beers who have made 4 or 5 batches and they're like, why wasn't I doing this earlier? I spent $600 in total, and I'm able to make all this great beer at home. Also, by the way, there goes that argument that home brewing costs way more than going to the store and buying beer. I'm telling you right now, I've plugged the numbers. Back in the day, I think maybe you could get away with that argument because it was more of I'm going to build out my system, and then my friend built his out, and I want to buy this thing that he has, or I want to show him up, and I'm going to make mine better. I think nowadays people are just cool with the electric all-in-one systems, which, I mean, there's just so much variety in those. And it's kind of a one and done. You get your gear home, you can make any style you want. It's just a matter of getting your ingredients, which the cost of ingredients for a batch of beer is maybe the same price as 2 12-packs of your favorite craft beer. So you're going to get 50 bottles, a whole keg out of a batch, a 5-gallon batch of beer, or you can get 24 bottles of craft beer. and you're making it yourself. I don't think that argument stands, but I do wonder where you think we're headed. Imagine like 20 years from now, are we going to still, is it going to be just electric all-in-ones? Or I wonder if like some other invention, are we going to move back into the whole tabletop brewing thing? I've been seeing more and more like advertisements for these weird tabletop brewing systems.
I'm not 100% familiar with a lot of the new stuff that's out there. I am guilty of kind of putting my horse blinders on and just, thinking about what I do. I'm very guilty of that. But I think let's look at the innovation of the brew bag, for example. I was fortunate enough in a very, very early part of my home brewing career, running into Rex, who owns the brew bag. He was a member of my homebrew club, and he introduced me to his product, and I was blown away because the last batch that I brewed was a red rye Belgian ale that I had a terrible stuck sparge with. I can remember struggling in my kitchen with it, and I mean, the struggle bus was definitely on that day, and it was just horrendous. So after that, I went to a meeting, I think that next day or 2 days later, and got acquainted with the brew bag. So I think that there is enough innovation out there, and kind of thinking about what's the next big thing. I have no idea, but I think it could be something, like we brewed, all grain batches in a very systematic way, and then all of a sudden a brew bag appeared, right?
Yeah.
And now that's kind of leading into these all-in-one grain systems that are, have a basket that you can use, which is very similar to what the brew bag is itself, right? So yeah, I think that there could be, many different variations of it, and I just think there's definitely room for other avenues. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I definitely love innovation. I mean, my favorite TV show to watch with my kids is Shark Tank because I like to see these ideas that people are throwing out there.
For sure.
And I think in brewing, we're going to continue to see, hopefully, innovation. You've got companies like our friends from Kegland who are constantly pumping out these new, novel, little, very affordable even, pieces of gear that just simplify or ease the brew day. What I have to admit, what my hope is that we stick with at least having some hand in the outcome that we're working on. So, I think part of the reason the whole Pico Brew thing wasn't a success is because people felt like they weren't actually brewing. They were just putting stuff in a machine. The machine was doing it for them, and then they would drink this okay beer in the end. And I don't know. I had some decent beers made with the Pico systems, but they weren't that great. They were they were better when they were made, in somebody's garage using a more of a traditional, all grain approach. So I'm with you. We have our Aussie friends to thank for brewing a bag, by the way. I don't want to not give them credit. They put that on the map. But I think, to sum up the kind of this idea in home brewing, I think what we're going to see is potentially at least is a return to people just wanting to make stuff in their homes, wanting to have their stamp, their creative stamp on that the stuff that is in their pint. I hope that's what we get back to. I do believe that it's going to have to be kind of on the backs of the younger generation, of course, because they're going to be the ones to keep it afloat. And I'm hoping that we, as middle-aged, silly, dorks who've been doing this for perhaps too long a little bit, Steve, that we are approachable to them, that they find us somewhat appealing. Maybe we have to laugh at ourselves a little bit more, make fun of our generation, whatever.
Sure.
But man, do I hope that they feel inspired to try this thing out that we've loved so much.
I hope.
We do have, it's, we've been around for a long time, Steve, and it's going to be difficult for us to project into the future with accuracy when it's not our generation that's going to be the ones doing this in the future. You know what I mean?
Right. Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I'm open-minded to it. I think, and if people want to reach out to us, we're all ears.
Yeah, without a doubt. And we've always been that way. We do have to get to a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be shifting our focus to where we think craft beer might be heading in the future. There might be some similarities with what we've already talked about, but that is where we're headed in the next segment.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
For me, going to the local brewery was something that I did to kick it with friends while enjoying a few uniquely crafted beverages. Now, again, I've been doing this for the last 20 years or so. Now, I've come across a few folks in my day who were clearly more into going to breweries and stuff for the drink. They wanted the buzz. But for me and my friends, that was just kind of a fun secondary benefit of drinking these delicious beers. There was little more the establishment had to offer than good beer and a comfy place to sit. Will that be enough to keep breweries afloat in the future? I'm curious what you think about that, Steve, that, pubs or craft brewery pubs, whatever people want to call them now, tap rooms, really just were there to kind of facilitate, again, community. And so you could show up, you could have a pint or three and talk with your friends. And that was all it needed to be. I'm curious if you think that's enough these days or for the future.
I think for a certain group of people who are there solely for the beer, yes, that's enough. My argument for years has been that modern day breweries that we see now are an extension to what the neighborhood bar or dive bar or whatever was, back in when we were growing up. And it's just a gathering place where you can have a couple pints with friends and hang out and shoot the shit. Right. Now there are, if you want to get, involved in more people coming, now there's going to have to be some more things to kind of draw them in. Right. That maybe they're not so interested in the beer, but it's there and it's kind of secondary. But maybe the focus more is, I want to catch up with my friend. And so we go somewhere and, they so happen to be serving beer, right?
Without a doubt. And sometimes you just want to go where everybody knows your name and they've always, they're always glad you came. You want to be where you can see our troubles are all the same. I mean, that to me, Cheers was the perfect example of what I was looking for when I, would go to the pub. I wanted to go to this place. And I'll tell you what, to this day, it's different, but I still have that feel when I go to my local watering holes. There are people that I can guarantee you, I could go to Crow and Wolf right now. I could drive down and grab some beers at House of Pendragon right now. And I will see people there that I know and that I'm going to start a conversation with. The people behind the bar, because of my being involved in this for as long as I have been, we're going to start a conversation. They're going to know me. I'm going to know them. There is that feel still, but it has evolved. And I think it would be silly for us to think, one, it hasn't, but two, that if that was the sole purpose of a pub starting up in this day and age, good luck. I don't think it's going to work. Yeah. There has been this shift that I've noticed. And as a family man, I love it. But this shift in breweries, tap rooms, breweries, pubs, whatever you want to call them, appealing to families and making them kid friendly. And, I just think it's such a neat thing. This it's kind of like the puritanical perspectives of alcohol are just lightening up at a breakneck speed. And now we're saying, bring your kids while, in essence, what we're saying is drink with your kids present,
Right.
Whereas back in the day, it was something you kind of did with just the adults. And I feel like in many ways, and again, maybe this is the psychologist in me, what you're doing is you're stripping the mystery from alcohol in general, which is probably going to be a far better thing for our kids who see their parents being responsible with this thing. And now, you also see the naysayers who are like, why are kids at the brewery? Well, dude, go to another brewery, because I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And if you don't want it, hey, stay home and make your own. Because I think what you're going to see is a lot more breweries opening themselves up to not just families, but pets, all of this to make it more of a place that people want to come hang out, not just for the beer, but for that feeling of being somewhere cool with the family and not having to leave the kids at home or not having to pay a sitter or whatever that might be.
Right. Yeah. I can't help but think that, of that brewery owner who is wanting to make sure that their brewery is, open to everybody. And it's really hard pressed to find anybody in this day and age who's going to say, no, you know what? I don't want the family of, 5 kids and a husband and wife, and then their friends and their 3 kids, and, whatever the case may be, add up all the numbers. And that's money coming into that brewery. And that cannot be ignored. And if you want to continue drinking at that establishment, then you need to suck it up, put your big boy pants on, and deal with it. I'm sorry, and I get it. It's sometimes
agreed.
frustrating when you have kids running around. It's not the brewery's fault, and you know what? It's not the kids' fault. It's the parents.
Don't get me wrong. You're going to run into to shitty parents. I mean, that's
For
just
sure.
a thing that
They're
happens.
everywhere.
And I feel bad for those kids whose parents aren't calling them out for screaming in some stranger's ear or whatever. Look, you go to Crow and Wolf on any day, usually on the weekends. There are kids out, they put chalk out, kids are drawing all over the concrete, and it's so cool, and they're playing games, and they've got cornhole, and they've got all this stuff. There's family board games that kids can grab and play with their parents while they're having a couple of pints. I love it. The number of times that I've actually seen an unruly child with parents who just are ignoring them is very close to zero. We'll just put it that way. Now, if you just have a problem with children, remind yourself that you used to be one, and my guess is you were the type that I wouldn't have wanted to hang around. So just keep that in mind, that there are good kids out there, and they're not going to hurt, they're not going to kill your vibe or whatever. And again, I'm fine with it. We could do a whole Brews Views just on kids in breweries, but I do think that we're going to have to see more and more of that to keep this thing afloat, because that's what people want nowadays. They want to be more inclusive with their family. And I see there's this one group of people locally here in town. I think they're still doing it. It's like 30 people, kids included, all ride their bike over to Crow and Wolf during the weekends, and you'll show up and there's like 30, 40 bikes just like piled up in this one area of
That's awesome.
Outside of the brewery, and you walk in and they're just having the greatest time, and the kids are playing games. And look, I love that. By the looks of things, I have a feeling most people are okay with that, but that is going to be the future. And I think we're starting to see the ramp up in that now, but are we going to see, like, I think about the future, are we going to see like, hey, we have a kids zone at the brewery where there's an Xbox and a Nintendo Switch? I'll be honest, when I was talking with the guys from Crow and Wolf prior to them actually, cutting the ribbon, as it were, we're just kind of tossing around ideas for that. And I suggested, I was like, how cool if young kids could come and have a place to meet other, make friends,
right,
and hang out and play video games and do more kid oriented stuff, while their parents are having a good time as well. I mean, why not?
Why not? Yeah, exactly. Why not? It kind of reminds me of like just like the pile up of the bikes, like the movie Sandlot, right? Where they all like they go to the park and they just play baseball all day. Yeah. It's just, it's nostalgic, and it just makes you feel good. You know, it's one of those moments where it's like, yeah, okay, a kid could be a kid, you know, and this coming from a teacher who spends his time with middle school kids every day of his life, by choice, mind you.
Yeah, that is crazy, Steve. I mean,
it is. But it totally is.
you know, so another thing that, moving away from that piece of it, another thing that I've noticed, we were talking earlier about how, you know, 20 plus years ago, when I at least when I got into craft beer, you know, you would seek out the beer that was talked about that was still available. So I mentioned Fat Tire and Mac and Jack's African Amber in the last segment. That's because both of those were insanely popular. Both of them amber ales, by the way, insanely popular in the Pacific Northwest at the time that I got into beer. You would go somewhere, at least my friends and I would, and we would just ask for a pitcher of Fat Tire. And that was what you wanted. And that was like your craft beer. And then you'd move on to, say, you know, Green Label or Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And that was what you were drinking. And then it would be something else. Oh man, Red Hook just came out with another, you know, cool new beer. Let's try that. And then what that kind of morphed into, by my observation, was, okay, you've got all of these, now that you've got all these breweries out there making great beers, different versions of amber ale exist, and we've tried them all and they're kind of played out. Now you've got these breweries. It'd be a single brewery that was like, we made this one special beer. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Whether it was Heady Topper or it was, Pliny the Elder. Now you got to find that. And it became like the whole Wales thing, right? Yep. You got to search out this beer. You got to pay somebody to ship it to you, you got to do it secretly because it's illegal to ship beer and blah, blah, blah. And it was like the whole focus was just on these handful of beers, when you had all these breweries producing equally as good beers, arguably, but, you know, the hype train started. And then, that probably took us all the way through about 2018, 2019. And then what I started to see was this kind of fading away of that, and people actually talking about, why are we so hyper focused on these arguably great beers when you could find one much easier and not have to wait? You know, Pliny the Younger is a perfect example. I love Vinny Chilurzo. I think Russian River is one of the best breweries on earth. That is my honest opinion. I would never wait in a line for a small pour of a beer just to say that I did it. I can't understand how. That's not saying that I'm judging people who choose to do that. I cannot understand how that would appeal to anybody to put that much effort into it, except for the community piece of it. Are we going to see a return to that, or is it going to be this thing that is because I look at the younger generation and they do seem to have a little bit of that thing where it's like, I'll go wait in line just to see this, you know, person, you know, play a concert, or to get this t-shirt, or whatever it might be. Are we going to return to that whole thing where it's like, let's pick the beer that gets all the hype for a couple of years, and that's going to be what everybody focuses on, or tries to emulate, right, in their breweries? Or is it going to be this softening of that piece of it, and recognizing that most breweries, if they really put the effort into it and employ the proper processes, can make a really killer version of most of these styles out there?
I think honestly that if we want to see the growth of breweries in the United States to continue in this upward trend, and I know right now it's kind of down, right? But I think we would have to go back to that whole idea of, you know, searching for the whales, because think about it. That's how the industry grew, right? That's how it grew. Like there's a brewery out here, Microphone, that makes some really good beer, and Mike from Microphone started doing this even before his brewery was established, and it was just word of mouth, internet, social media, and he became very successful with it. And it's because of, you know, how he was able to find that group of people who were really interested in his beers. I chased him for a long time. We all chased Goose Island for the longest time, and their Bourbon County. Maybe not so much anymore. But things change and things fade away, and also things kind of grow. Around here in the Midwest, it was a lot of Three Floyds.
Oh yeah.
Now you would walk into a local liquor store and ask the guys, do you have any Three Floyds? And they're like, no, sorry, we don't have any. Now it's all over the place. It's all over the place. And that's just the way it is. No one's really like that, geeked about it anymore. But
yeah, the excitement has dwindled, right?
It has. But it's replaced by other breweries and other beers. So, there's I guess there's a parallel to like, kind of going back to your daughter's claim that Brewlosophy is an influencer. It's the whole idea of going viral, right? Like everyone's videos aren't going to go viral. That's just a known fact, right? Not every beer is going to go quote unquote viral, but you get that one viral sensation, that one video that kind of puts you on the map. And then all of a sudden like, oh, okay, you're the real deal. Like, what you're doing. I'm going to just follow you because I'm going to drink your beers because damn, you make good beer. So it kind of goes back to, the crux of everything that they want to do as a brewery and sell beer. That's what it's all about. So
yeah, I don't disagree. That's an interesting thing that I'll be paying attention to as we progress into the future.
For sure.
Another thing, and you brought this up earlier off air, that this idea of flagship beers. I remember going to breweries. I mean, God. Again, I'm sure most people can relate with this, that COVID is kind of this like chunk in their history where it's like that changed a lot of things. That's kind of where my reference is at. But like prior to COVID, even all the local places, some of my best friends, own these breweries, and they had flagship beers. You would show up and you would get Lancelot IPA from House of Pendragon. Crow and Wolf, has their IPAs and has their couple of flagships as well. Is that, it used to be that the majority of the taps at a brewery were their flagships, and then they'd have maybe one or two rotating taps. I mean, I still remember that. Not so much these days. What I'm starting to see is the flagships are this very small percentage of what they try to offer regularly, but that the rotating stuff seems to be, it's almost more like they're experimenting with different spins on a specific style and offering that, and they're kind of almost seeking feedback from the patrons who come in there. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on where this idea of flagship beers is going to be in the future.
I think that the flagship beers kind of service the need for a certain demographic. And it's kind of like guys like us, right? Who, and I don't want to seem all hoity-toity about in this comment. I'm going to get just blasted for saying this, and I don't care. Those who know beer, right? And we know the difference between, certain beer styles. I think that draws us in. And then there's I don't want to say gimmicky in a bad way, but the experimental things and stuff like that might draw in people that are a little bit more adventurous. I'm not that adventurous when I go to a brewery. I want something that I know, something that is, if I know a hop, then okay, I'm going to like that. I know I'm going to like that. And maybe it'll be something for somebody who comes in and like, okay, I'm just, willing to try anything today. That's going to, appeal to them. That's going to appeal to their palate. So I think that there's room enough on the boards in a brewery to kind of have varieties for everybody. And that's just the way I see it.
Well, I'd love to see, this is hypothetical, but I would love to see a survey of, brewery owners and head brewers who've been doing it for a decade or more, on how many of them started off with the mentality of, I'm going to brew the beers that I like to drink, and where they're at today with that. Because the truth of the matter is, you made a comment, for those who know beer, like you and me, that there is, I think there's a market for that. But if you take a ratio of those who know beer versus those who enjoy beer, we're on the tiny end of that.
For
there's
sure.
many more people
For sure.
who just enjoy good beer,
Yes.
and good for them, who don't geek out on it the way that you and I do, or the way that head brewers do. And I think there's an element of, again, I don't mean to use this in a judgmental way, but arrogance that comes with this idea that I'm just going to brew the beers that I like.
Yeah.
You can do that, but if what you like is, let's just say Belgian ale, and 90% of your community wants a crisp pale lager or, a hoppy IPA,
Yeah.
good luck staying in business.
Exactly.
You can't survive on that mentality alone. Now, what I love about the talk about flagship beers is there's a local brewery, relatively local, called Barrel House, and they've become quite big. So they're actually based out of, I think it's Buellton, California, and if not, it's somewhere over on the coast. So they're not Fresno Clovis, like where I live, but they opened a tap room here in a very populated area, very like a strip mall type of place that a lot of people hang out. And I took my wife and my daughter out to lunch yesterday, and they had one of the Barrel House beers on tap, and it's just called Standard Ale. And I'm like, man, I already know what it is because I've had it a million times, but seeing it on the menu at a local restaurant and going, that is such a genius move, because most people who don't know beer but who enjoy it are going to look and say, hey, it's a standard ale. Let me give that a go, right? What it tasted like to me, honestly, was like it's hard to place it, but it was really kind of more or less like a blonde ale, or like but even more so like a British Golden type of deal. And I'm like, man, I've been to another place that had what they called a pub ale, and it was an ordinary bitter. Like, I'm like, these are those beers, and they can be marketed to people who may not know about it. But when you call a beer in America, quote, bitter, you're going to immediately eliminate probably 60% of people who might otherwise enjoy that beer. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it something as simple as naming schemes, like, man, where are we going to see that in the future? And just changing people's mindsets based on what we call something. I think it's interesting.
I think it's interesting. And I've seen that also with Workforce. They put out, and I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain I'm right on this. They have what they consider to be a black Pilsner. And it's all it really is a Schwarzbier, right?
It's a Schwarzbier.
That's all it is. But that seeing that word on the board or on their menu list, might be intimidating for people. And it's more approachable to say, oh yeah, I'll have the black Pilsner. And maybe that's the reason why, black IPAs are called black IPAs, because, what the hell is a Cascadian ale? It's just to play with words, hear two guys talking about words because we love them, right?
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer to us, but I think for everybody else, it's more approachable. It's not that hoity-toity, oh, give me your Schwarzbier, please. So yeah, I mean, call it what you want, it's still beer at the end of the day.
Yeah. And honestly, there are I've thought about this quite a bit over the years, Steve, that there are styles out there that so many people, probably a majority of people who, go to craft breweries these days with their families and whatnot, there's these styles that they've never been introduced to, they've never tasted, that they may very well love. I mean, you look at our Average Brew review episodes where you got Justin, Craig, and Tim drinking these styles of beers that, maybe they've had a sample of a commercial one or one that I've brewed because they're my friends, but really these aren't beers that they're accustomed to. And you listen to those quads, it blew my mind how much they loved those beers. And the funny thing about it is, we got done recording and Craig especially was like, how the hell was I unfamiliar with all of with that style of beer? Those were incredible. He's like, I'm going to be seeking those out. And my response to him was, good luck finding them. That the beauty of home brewing is that, or going to a good, craft brewery that has a nice selection, is that you get access to these very unique, oftentimes delicious styles of beer. And I just wonder, like, who's going to be the one, I feel like Belgian ale is a good example because that Belgian ale was popular among homebrewers. One argument is because the beer that they were making that wasn't intended to be a Belgian ale got contaminated and ended up tasting like a Belgian ale. But that's a joke. But no, Belgian ale was very popular among homebrewers for a while because they were relatively easy to make and it gave you access to this really delicious, regionally based style of beer that you just couldn't buy off the store shelves. Who's going to be the brewery, who reintroduces triple, to the masses, and that becomes the big thing? Or, it's bound to happen with something, I don't know. I again, really, really neat things that I suspect we're going to see in the future as more and more newbies, as it were, come into the fold and are introduced and welcomed into this whole craft beer thing.
And then there's also the idea that I've been hearing for years where, these brewers are influenced by what home brewers are doing. There's a great beer fest that I attend for the last several years in Oswego in Illinois here, and it is around September, and we have maybe 4 or 5 tents for homebrew. And without a doubt, every single year, everyone raves and stands in line for the homebrew. Not so much for the commercial beers, unfortunately. And, there's still a lot to be said about what we're doing as homebrewers that kind of lead into what goes on at breweries. And we go back to the community, go back to those conversations and those relationships that we have. That's, kind of spin this in a certain direction. That's, it kind of helps everybody out. Right. So
yeah,
I'm all for it.
Yeah. So am I. We spent some time talking about what breweries, may end up doing or what they're doing today and will likely continue doing, but in the future to attract a wider swath of people. What we talked about, being family friendly and all of that. I had this thought, what's going to be the first brewery that offers actual like childcare? They're like, we actually have somebody in child development who will watch your kids while you're hanging out here and do like crafts with them or something. I mean, it's bound to happen again,
Yeah.
But another big one is obviously food. And what we're seeing now are, it used to be that you had tap rooms and brew pubs. And what I noticed, at least from the time that I was brewing, is that the brew pub reigns supreme, but that's been replaced almost by a tap room that allows food trucks to show up. And I think it's great. The big issue with that I've been hearing from local friends is these food trucks charge almost double what you would pay, a brew pub for a meal. I mean, they are not cheap most of the time. So I wonder if what we're going to see is like breweries that maybe start their own food truck so that they can keep it separate. So you've got like 2 separate businesses because what I've been told is that the licensing and everything for starting an actual brew pub, having a kitchen attached to a brewery is just a pain in the ass. Whereas, you can get a license to run a food truck fairly easily. If you've already got everything in place with your brewery, you just have these 2 separate businesses, but that are linked. I don't know. That's one of those ideas that came to my mind as well. I think we may start seeing more stuff like that.
I know for a number of years, Workforce did not have food, and they would have food trucks, and they would allow people to bring in outside food and whatnot. And then, like anything else that Brandon and Amanda Wright have done with Workforce, it's just all systematic. And it's why I kind of brag about them all the time when I talk about beer, because they just had such an awesome vision, and they were never that gung-ho about like getting it done right away, but it was just patiently kind of waiting. And then finally, they had this brilliant idea of letting another company come in, and they created the space within their tap room, and they're the ones who sell the beer or sell the food, and it's their business. It's Happy Belly food, and then in Workforce Brewing Company.
That is awesome.
It's great.
Yeah.
And their food is fantastic. And it's such a cool idea. This way here, like you're talking about the licensing and stuff like that, and the insurance and whatnot. Brandon and Amanda don't have to worry about that. It's all
that's rad.
For that other company. Happy Belly takes care of that. So I think it's a rad idea, and I think that more places will probably follow suit with that. There's another place in the south side of the city, actually, that the name escapes me right now, but they actually have a food truck within their literal food truck in their brewery, and you can order food in from there.
Badass.
Another,
that's so cool.
Really cool idea. And I'm not even sure how all the logistics go with, the legalities of that establishment. But, it's still ideas of, bringing food in because people do want to have that. And, it's a lot easier, I think, just to look at their menu board and say, yeah, I want this or I want that, and go along with my beer. So
I love it.
Hey, yeah.
Well, and one of the things that allows you to do is, determine where is it that we are going to profit the most. Do we want to bring people in and offer them, bites at least, food offerings that, you're not going to lose money on it, but that's not going to break the bank so that they feel comfortable spending more money on beer? Or is it going to be come for the food and the beer is the thing but it allows you to balance that as opposed to relying on a whole other business who has to keep themselves afloat independently with their food truck, which I support food trucks. I love them. I spend way too much money on food trucks because I love what they're offering us.
For sure.
I'm just speaking more globally about, I know a lot of people. We went to Kronwolf a few weeks ago, and they usually have 2 or 3 food trucks out there, which I think is pretty sweet. And my wife and I were the only ones who got anything because everyone else is like, Jesus, I'd rather just stop at Taco Bell on the way home or something, rather than spending $80 at a food truck to feed my husband and myself or whatever. And so just a thought. And I think it's cool that you've already experienced some breweries that are integrating that idea or that concept into their businesses. I look forward to seeing more of that as well. And perhaps what they'll be doing is partnering with existing food trucks and kind of bringing them into their fold and seeing what goes from there. So many cool options. We already talked a little bit about demographics in the homebrewing section, and it's the same for craft beer, right? The biggest target when it comes to marketing of craft beer is probably middle-aged, white men, and we have to do something to change that. We have to expand that to everybody. But another thought I had. My wife was, we just moved. I've talked about that quite a bit. My wife was out walking the dogs the other day, and on her walk, right as she left our house, she bumped into a couple of our neighbors. And these neighbors, they happen to be just a little bit older than us, maybe 15, 20 years older than us, and but very friendly. And my wife's telling them about Brewlosophy, and my husband, brews beer in the garage, and you're going to see him out there and come over and sample his beers when he gets going, and all the cool stuff that I love. And, they're going, oh, that's cool. We drink beer occasionally, but we're really big wine people. And I thought, I've never really considered this idea of introducing people who are into other forms of alcoholic beverages, whether it's spirits or wines or whatever, to beer in a way that's not, pejorative, because I feel like there's a lot of that. We've talked about how craft beer people love to piss on, people who drink Miller Lite and stuff, and how if we want to bring more people into craft beer, we got to be more open to accepting that it's okay if they like, Miller Lite and Bud Light and Coors Light and stuff. That's not. It's sort of the same with like people who are into wine. I remember thinking, oh, those are wine people, leave them alone, But no, I can't wait till my neighbors come over and pull that first beer off of my own tap and go, wow, that's different than I expected. I'm kind of looking forward to brewing for them and trying to bring them in as well. So
for sure. I think that there's, it just all goes back to, having variety and having, enough for everybody to come in and say, yeah, okay, I would try that, and
yeah.
Come back another time and have it again.
So there's another thought that I had about just craft breweries in general. And it's, we spend a little time talking about the whole idea. I'm going to brew the beers that I like to drink. Well, oftentimes brewers want to drink beers that I would contend are maybe a little bit more extreme in terms of hop flavor or hop bitterness or, alcohol strength, whatever it might be. I have noticed over the last 4 or 5 years, kind of this trend moving away from just offering those more. I'm not saying extreme because they're like, oh, they're crazy beers, BrewDog beers, but to your average beer drinker, like, wow, that's a little different for me,
Yeah.
But this move to making more approachable beers. In fact, Krone Wolf's a good example. They just announced they put on tap a new pale lager that they made called Pulaski. That's phenomenally good. It's got hints of kind of like a Coors Banquet even.
Nice.
And their whole idea, Pulaski is a name that's very associated with Clovis. They are in the city of Clovis. It's the street, the kind of the main thoroughfare in Old Town Clovis. And they worked with the city of Clovis to name this beer that, so that people see it as recognizable and they come in and can order it. And they've got this delicious crafted version supporting local business of this nice pale lager, that is very approachable, very good. And I have a feeling that within the next few months, it's probably going to rise to one of their most popular beers on tap.
Thank God, because I just think I can't help but think that, making these quote unquote extreme beers, how profitable is that? And is it something that is sustainable year in and year out? I was fortunate enough to win a competition a couple of years ago, and I still have conversations with the head brewer, Ken McMullen, over at Fox Republic out in Yorkville. And Ken always reminds me that the smoked stout that we brewed actually was the most, or with maple syrup, was the most expensive beer that they have ever brewed. And it's because of the maple syrup and everything else that we added to it. And sure, this was a one-off, and it was just a fun brew day and everything else. But can a brewery sustain itself when they're doing that day in and day out? And my guess is that they probably can't. Maybe once in a while, sure, maybe. But if you want that approachable beer that's going to, hopefully sell, I would look more towards, a simpler recipe, not so quote unquote extreme, and just kind of, keep it the basics. Because I think that's what people want. But then again, I'm not everybody. So,
that's actually another trend that I've seen. It used to be that you'd go to a pub and every beer cost the same, right? Then I started, and then I'd say probably a decade or so ago, you started to see, okay, well, if we make a triple IPA or we make a quad or we make an imperial stout, we'll charge you the same, but you're going to get a smaller pour of it. Rather than 16 ounces, you'll get 12 ounces. Okay, you're like, all right, that's cool. Now I've seen this in a few places in my travels, actually, within the United States at least, of different beers are just priced differently. Yes. So if it's a pale lager, you'll get your full pint of pale lager. It'll be $5. But if you're going to get an IPA, you'll get your full pint of IPA, but it's $8. And I wonder if we're going to see a move towards that sort of a model, that pricing model. I'm not sure where I fall in terms of my preference on it or my opinion on it. I end up just paying for it anyways because I want to try these beers. But it is always kind of a shock to me when I'm like, whoa, I didn't realize that this such and such beer was going to cost me $3 or $4 more than this other one, because I think I'm just so rooted in the historical way of doing that, which was you'd go and you'd just pay a single price for every pint that you got. But
sure, but I think that we are more prone to understand what their thought process is with charging more for this beer. I'm not going to name the name of the brewery because I'm not 100% sure I'm accurate on this, but I do think that I've been to breweries that have been doing this already. And I don't have a problem with it because, again, I know what they are putting into that beer, and I know the cost that what it costs to make that beer. So I'm fine with it.
Well, and it makes it, all it's doing is like the beer industry catching up with every other industry out there.
Exactly.
That's the way everything else is priced. So
Exactly.
it costs more. I mean, as a home brewer, if I'm making an IPA, I might spend $50 on that batch. Whereas if I make a pale lager, I could be down, a blonde ale or something, a pale lager, you're down in the mid 20s easily, because it's lower alcohol. So less grains. It's got way less hops. Because of lower alcohol, you don't have to focus so much on your yeast in terms of propping it up or pitching more or whatever it might be. So there are very valid reasons for, I believe, for a brewery to move into that model. And the nice thing is, it sort of balances itself out. If they're going to charge you more for an expensive beer, that means they're charging you less for an easier to make or less expensive beer for them to make. So you're kind of, it's half dozen in one hand and 6 in the other or whatever. You also brought up the idea of beer alternatives being a thing. And, 15, 20 years ago, that meant cider. Nowadays, boy, it means much more than just cider.
Oh, yeah.
It could be a slushy sour. It could be a seltzer water. It could, in fact, Crow and Wolf I believe they took gold for their flagship seltzer called Dark Horse. It blows my mind that those have become so commonplace now that they're being submitted to competitions. They are the reason a lot of people will go to a brewery is to try their seltzer or maybe their cider or whatever else it might be. Where do you see that going in the future?
I honestly can't see it going away. I see the slushy machines, they'll be coming out really soon. The seltzers, of course, are always there. I think there's a few here and there that will offer some kind of NA beer. Maybe they don't make it themselves, but they'll have a tap that has, an NA beer available. Cider around here is a totally different license that you have to have. Same here. So that, they can probably offer it from another brewery, like a guest tap, whatever. That's fine. And same thing with mead. But yeah, all it does is it offers more variety for everybody. And if you're going with a group of people, I think about it in terms of if I go out with my work friends, there's a brewery that's not too far from the school that I teach at called Imperial Oak. And Imperial Oak I've always recommended it for people that I work with because not everyone drinks beer. Some people like cocktails, some people like wine, and they have a license somehow, some way, they were able to do it, and they were able to get a license that allows them to have, wine and spirits and beer. And it's a great selection of, offerings. And their beer is really good. So I go there.
Well, I'll tell you what, I hope beyond hope that this continues to be a trend that we see and that grows. Because to me, if there's anything that actually I should just bring my wife in and have her tell you what she tells me so often when we go to that very rare nowadays brewery that doesn't offer a seltzer or some other non-beer alternative. My wife, I hate it when people are like, oh, they just haven't tried the right beer yet. She is just not a fan of beer, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to force her to become a fan of beer just because I love it and I brew it and I talk about it all the time. So when we go to a place and they have a variety of seltzers or they have different types of ciders on tap, if they've got that licensing, or they've got a slushy, she wants to try that, and she'll usually find something that she enjoys drinking there. So I hope that doesn't change when it comes to breweries. But as I think about the future, what I'm kind of looking forward to actually are these companies that spin off and become focused solely on one of those things. Up in Seattle, I go up there multiple times a year. I still have family up there. There are a couple cider houses. So you've got Seattle Cider Company, and then I believe, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's called Schilling Cider Company or something like that. And they have these tap rooms in the same way that a brewery would, where you can go and just drink their ciders, and it's phenomenal. They have there's a great distillery up there right on the pier down in downtown Seattle that you can go in there and get flights of their spirits. It's so cool. In fact, I've been to another place, I forget what it's called, in Fremont, California, I believe, that does the same thing. It's just so fun. Are we going to see, I mean, this sounds nuts to us now, but are we going to see seltzeries, where a place where you can go and they have 15 different seltzers on tap and that's it. And, they're offering these unique spins on this novel to us relatively, beverage. The seltzers aren't going away.
No.
I was just drinking seltzer yesterday. It's not going away.
No,
we
not
need
at
to
all.
embrace it, and let's stop being old codgers who love to complain for the sake of complaining and be
Get
cool
off my
with the
grass.
fact. No shit. Be cool with the fact that we're embracing this thing that has the same root, which is alcohol.
Exactly.
And let's be okay with that. I would love nothing more than to be cruising, from here to Seattle. We drive up at least once a year to Seattle. And, somewhere in Oregon or somewhere in Washington, we hear about this new seltzery that we get to go to. And my wife finally is like, now you know what it feels like. Let's drink seltzers.
Exactly.
I want to experience that.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I think it's about time, right? So.
Somebody's bound to do it. And the cool thing about seltzer, you think about what goes into making it. Honestly, they could be like, hey, we threw together a batch of this, mango passion fruit seltzer today. It'll be ready tomorrow. How cool would that be? I mean, that's just like cashing in on what people love. I just can't imagine it not being a huge success, but we'll see. And that's what the future may very well hold. I look forward to seeing that. The last point that I want to talk about is innovation in general when it comes to craft brewing. I'm really curious. We're friends with Haas and with Hopsteiner and these various hop industry, folks in the hop industry who are creating incredible kind of downstream products that really are intended to improve the efficiency of brewing on a larger scale. And we're talking about flowable hop products that you can add that contribute the same amount and the same quality of bitterness as adding a bunch of hops that are going to absorb a bunch of liquid that you have to boil for a certain amount of time to isomerize. You can make a beer right now. You still have to use grains, of course, unless you want to go with extract, but you can make a beer with no actual hop material and your yield is about 99 to 100% if you're doing that, because you're not throwing away any of the wet spent hops that have all of this liquid wort in it. You're actually I wonder if in the future we're going to see more and more of that, or if brewers are going to hang on to this idea that the best beers are produced using the raw ingredients we're familiar with.
I mean, I think that it's just it's limited to only people's imaginations, right? And if it's out there, then we can use it. And I don't see a problem with it. If it's yielding 99% of what you're putting into it, hell yeah, that's awesome.
I'll never forget. God, this was 2018, 2019. I was up in Yakima for Hop Harvest, and we went to Haas, they have the coolest tasting room there where they do a lot of experimentation with these types of products. And I forget the guy's name, but he served us. He's the brewer and the guy who kind of runs the operations at this tasting room. And he served me, and I think it was Brian Hall, who was contributing back then. He served us this beer, and it's just this hoppy, beautiful pale ale. I mean, we're drinking it going, man, this is awesome. What new hop variety is this? And he goes, what would you think if I told you that there was no actual hops used in the making of that beer? And we're like, what? And he goes, no, I bittered it with this new product that, that we're using for bittering. I flavored it and hit it with this other product that we're using. And we're sitting there going, this is the way of the future. I mean, how do you not use this stuff if they can produce it on a scale that allows people to use it for the same cost or maybe even less than what it would cost to use real hops? It's like, why wouldn't you do that? And there are all of these other things, benefits that they talk about in using these things, whether it's shelf stability or, you don't have to, you can store this stuff in the fridge and it'll last longer, whatever it is. I just can't help but see more and more breweries embracing these modern innovative hop products and potentially grain products and yeast products. Who knows where we're going to be in 30 years from now, but I'm excited to see where it goes. And my hope is that it contributes to more and more people wanting to be or wanting to participate in craft beer and brewing.
Perfectly said. I can't help but think that there's, a limitless amount of innovations that will come out of all of this. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Yeah, and there's really no telling where it's going to go in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And while our opinions on the direction we're heading are just that, opinions, I think it's safe to say that even if we are wrong, which I guarantee we are about some of the stuff we talked about, things are going to look different than they do today in the future. The same way things look different today than they did a couple decades ago. I can tell you that as somebody who's been involved in this for over 2 decades now. One thing I am certain about, though, is that it's time for us to wrap things up. This episode has gone on a little bit longer than usual. Steve, do you have any last thoughts?
Keep on supporting your local breweries. Keep on having those conversations, build that community, those relationships. It's important. And keep brewing. That's what it's all about.
Amen, my friend.
Cheers.
Cheers to that. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brewlosophy Show, over at youtube.com/@TheBrewlosophy Show. That's the @ symbol, followed by The Brewlosophy Show. No umlaut needed. If you're listening to this podcast, I am confident you're going to love the videos that Martin's creating over at YouTube as well. And make sure to head to brewlosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brewlosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
If you love chilling mysteries, unsolved cases, and a touch of mom-style humor, Moms and Mysteries is the podcast you've been searching for. Hey guys, I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa. Join us every Tuesday for Moms and Mysteries, your gateway to gripping, well-researched true crime stories. Each week, we deep dive into a variety of mind-boggling cases as we shed light on everything from heists to whodunits. We're your go-to podcast for mysteries with a motherly touch. Subscribe now to Moms and Mysteries wherever you get your podcasts.